The street was loud. Cars honking, people talking. Footsteps rushing past like this was just another ordinary day. Then a small voice broke through the noise. "Please, someone help me." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. That's what made it terrifying. Most people didn't even turn their heads. A few glanced for half a second, then kept walking. In a busy street, everyone assumes someone else will step in. A little girl stood near the curb, clutching her backpack with both hands. It looked too big for her small frame. Her shoulders were tense, like she was trying to make herself smaller. Her eyes kept darting around, searching for a face that might care. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, frozen between fear and hope. Keanu Reeves was walking past when he heard her voice. At first, he kept moving, the way most people do when something feels uncomfortable. But after 2 steps, he stopped, not because she shouted louder, because of the way she said it. There was no panic in her voice, just exhaustion. Like she had already asked for help before, and no one listened. Keanu slowly turned around. He didn't rush toward her. He didn't shout. He didn't look around for attention. He simply looked at her. And in that moment, his expression changed. The girl's hands were shaking slightly. She tried to hide it by tightening her grip on the backpack straps. Her eyes flicked past Keanu, then back again, like she was afraid of being seen talking to the wrong person. Whatever was happening, it wasn't an accident. Keanu noticed something else too. 4 men standing a short distance away. They weren't running. They weren't yelling. They were watching. To anyone else, they looked like random guys hanging around on the street, relaxed, casual, almost bored. But their eyes never left the girl, and that's when Keanu understood. This wasn't a moment. This was a situation, the kind most people walk away from because it's easier not to get involved. Keanu took 1 step closer to the girl, slow, deliberate, making sure she could see him clearly. Not to scare her, to let her know she wasn't alone anymore. The street kept moving around them. People passed by, cars continued honking. Life didn't stop. But for the girl, everything depended on what happened next. What would you do if a child quietly asked for help in public? Would you stop or keep walking? Keanu already had his answer, and the 4 men watching from a distance had no idea who had just stepped into their path. The street didn't look dangerous. That was the problem. It was one of those wide city roads where everything feels normal. Cafes with outdoor seating, people scrolling on their phones, street vendors calling out prices. The kind of place where parents feel safe letting their kids walk a little ahead. The little girl stood right in the middle of it all. She wasn't in an alley. She wasn't cornered in a dark space. She was surrounded by people yet completely alone. Keanu noticed how carefully she positioned herself. She stayed close to moving crowds, never stopping for too long. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked behind her, checking the same 4 men. They weren't close enough to touch her, but they were close enough to remind her they were there. One leaned against a street pole, arms crossed, pretending to be on his phone. Another stood near a parked car, laughing at something the others said. The third kept pacing slowly, like he had nowhere to be. The 4th watched everything without moving at all. No shouting, no grabbing, no obvious threat, just control. To most people passing by, it looked harmless. 4 guys hanging out, a kid waiting for someone. That's why no one stopped. Keanu had seen this kind of thing before, not on the street but in life. Situations that didn't look serious until they were too late. He glanced around, noticing how easily the danger blended in. A couple walked past laughing. A man brushed by the girl's shoulder without looking down. Someone bumped into her backpack and muttered an apology before moving on. The girl flinched. That reaction told Keanu everything. Fear like that doesn't come from nothing. She kept adjusting the sleeve of her hoodie, even though the weather was warm. Her fingers were fidgeting constantly, not playing, not bored, but nervous. Her breathing was shallow, controlled, like she was trying not to panic. Keanu didn't ask her questions yet. He didn't want to scare her. He didn't want to alert them. Instead, he positioned himself just slightly to her side, close enough to block her from their direct line of sight, but not so close that she felt trapped. From the corner of his eye, he saw one of the men straighten up. Another stopped pacing, they noticed. The street noise continued, but something underneath it shifted. The invisible tension that only people involved can feel. Keanu felt it. The girl felt it even more. She took a small step back, not away from Keanu, but closer to him. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was a decision, trust. Keanu kept his voice low when he spoke, calm enough that it sounded normal to anyone nearby. "You okay?" She hesitated. Her eyes flicked past him again. One of the men was smiling now, not friendly, not angry, just watching. She swallowed. "I think so," but her body said otherwise. Keanu nodded like he believed her. Not because he did, but because she needed to feel in control. That's when he noticed something else. The men weren't just watching her. They were watching him. One of them whispered something to the others. Another chuckled under his breath. They looked relaxed, confident, the way people do when they think they have power. Whatever they were planning, they didn't expect interference, especially not from someone like him. To them, Keanu was just another passerby, quiet, unassuming, no uniform, no authority badge, just a man standing in the wrong place, and that made them careless. Keanu slowly scanned the area again, exits, open spaces, people who might actually intervene if things escalated. He didn't look tense. He didn't square his shoulders or clench his fists. He stayed calm, because calm makes people underestimate you. The girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her voice dropped even lower when she spoke again. "They won't leave me alone." That was all she said. No names, no accusations, no explanation. She didn't need to say more. Keanu didn't respond right away. He didn't reassure her with big promises or dramatic words. Instead, he did something simple. He stayed. And that alone began to change the situation. The men noticed it too. One of them rolled his eyes. Another muttered something and took a step closer, not toward the girl, but toward Keanu. Testing, measuring, still no violence, still no shouting, just pressure, the kind that makes most people back away. But Keanu didn't move. He didn't look at the man stepping forward. He kept his attention on the girl, grounding her in the moment. "You don't have to go anywhere," he said quietly. "Just stay right here." For the first time since she spoke up, her breathing slowed. The street kept flowing around them, unaware that a line had been drawn. And the four men, who thought they were invisible in plain sight, had no idea they were about to lose control of the situation. Because once someone sees what's happening, it can't be unseen. Up close, Keanu could see what most people had missed. The girl wasn't just scared. She was exhausted. Not the kind of tired that comes from running or playing, but the kind that settles into your shoulders when you've been alert for too long. Her posture was stiff, like her body didn't trust itself to relax. Even standing still seemed to take effort. She kept her chin slightly down, eyes lifting instead of turning her head fully. A habit people develop when they're trying not to draw attention. Every sound made her tense. Every sudden movement in the crowd caused her fingers to tighten around the straps of her backpack. It wasn't a school backpack, it was older, worn. The zipper didn't close properly. She adjusted it again, even though nothing had changed. Keanu noticed how she positioned her feet, always angled toward open space, never boxed in. She was constantly calculating where she could move if she needed to. That kind of awareness doesn't come naturally to children. It's learned. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where her parents were. Those questions could wait. Right now, what mattered was how she felt, and what her body was already telling him. Her eyes kept drifting back to the four men, even when she tried not to. Each time she looked, she flinched slightly, like she expected something to happen. When one of them laughed, her shoulders jumped. She whispered, barely loud enough for Keanu to hear, "They keep following me." The words came out flat, not emotional, almost practiced. That scared him more than if she had been crying. "How long?" he asked gently. She shrugged, a small movement, unsure. "A while, that was it. No timeline, no details. Just long enough to wear her down." Keanu nodded slowly, showing he was listening, not interrupting, not pushing. Children like her often shut down when adults demand answers too fast. He noticed her hands now, faint marks around her wrist. Not dark, not dramatic, but recent enough to still be visible. She kept tugging her sleeve down without realizing it, a reflex more than a choice. She wasn't trying to hide bruises from him. She was trying to hide them from the world. Around them, people continued walking. A woman passed by with headphones in. A man nearly bumped into the girl and didn't even notice. Someone laughed loudly behind them. Life was happening. And yet, this child was standing in the middle of it, silently asking for help. Keanu felt a familiar frustration, not anger, but disappointment. How easily moments like this disappear in public spaces. How quickly people convince themselves that it's none of their business. The girl spoke again, even quieter now. "They said I just needed to talk." She paused, then added, "But I didn't want to." Her voice cracked slightly at the end like she hated herself for saying that much. Keanu didn't react, no shock. No visible judgment. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to." She looked up at him for the first time properly. Really looked. Her eyes were searching his face, scanning for signs: impatience, disbelief, irritation. The things she had probably seen before. She didn't find them. For a second, her guard dropped, just a little. Her breathing hitched, then steadied. The men shifted again in the distance. One of them nudged another with his elbow. They were watching more closely now. Their casual confidence was still there, but something else had crept in: irritation. They didn't like losing control. The girl noticed too. She stiffened. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," she said quickly, like she was apologizing. Keanu gave a small nod. "That's a smart rule." That surprised her. Most adults would have dismissed it. He didn't. She swallowed and whispered, "But I didn't know what else to do." And there it was. The moment she chose to ask for help anyway. Why do you think kids often hesitate to ask adults for help, even when they're scared? Because many kids are taught to stay quiet, stay polite, and not cause trouble, even when something feels wrong. That hesitation can be dangerous. Keanu could feel her weighing her options in real time. Staying silent had already failed her. Speaking up felt risky too. He stayed exactly where he was. No sudden movements, no dramatic gestures, just presence. The girl's eyes filled slightly, but she blinked it away fast. She didn't want to cry. Crying would make things real. Crying would make people stare. She glanced at the crowd, then back at him. "Are they mad?" she asked. Keanu followed her gaze briefly. One of the men was pretending to scroll on his phone again, but his jaw was tight. Another had crossed his arms, posture defensive now. "They don't get to be mad," Keanu said calmly. "You didn't do anything wrong." She absorbed that slowly, like it was a new idea. For the first time since he'd met her, she shifted her weight forward instead of back. It was subtle but meaningful, trust growing. Keanu knew this part mattered most. Not the confrontation, not the reveal, this moment. Because if she felt safe now, truly safe, everything else would follow. The street noise swelled again as a bus passed by, briefly blocking the men from view. The girl flinched, then realized she couldn't see them anymore. Her shoulders dropped. Just a fraction. Keanu noticed and gently adjusted his stance, making sure he stayed between her and where they'd been standing. She exhaled. Not fully, but enough. And somewhere behind them, the four men were beginning to realize something had changed. Not because of force, not because of threats, but because a scared little girl was no longer alone. Keanu didn't turn toward the men right away. That was intentional. People who rely on intimidation expect a reaction: fear, anger, panic. When they don't get it, it unsettles them. Silence forces them to question their position. He kept his body relaxed, shoulders loose, hands visible. To anyone watching, he looked like a man having a quiet conversation with a child. Nothing threatening, nothing dramatic, but the men noticed the details. The way he stood between them and the girl. The way he didn't glance back repeatedly. The way he didn't rush. Confidence like that doesn't come from impulse. It comes from control. The girl sensed it too. She shifted slightly closer to him, not touching, but close enough to feel anchored. Her eyes still flicked toward the men, but not as often now. Keanu spoke softly again, just to her. "You're doing the right thing." She nodded, though she didn't fully believe it yet. One of the men cleared his throat loudly from behind them. Keanu didn't respond. Another took a step forward, shoes scraping lightly against the pavement. It wasn't aggressive. It was deliberate. A test. Keanu felt it without turning. He finally looked over his shoulder, not quickly, not sharply, just enough to acknowledge their presence. His face was neutral. No anger, no challenge. That calm landed heavier than any threat. The man who had stepped forward hesitated. His confidence faltered for half a second. Keanu turned back to the girl. That dismissal stung more than words. The girl's breathing slowed as she watched the exchange. She hadn't expected that. She had expected shouting, or fear, or chaos. Instead, there was quiet, and somehow that quiet felt safer. Keanu adjusted his stance slightly, placing his feet more firmly. Still casual, still unremarkable, but now unmistakably steady. The men whispered among themselves. One laughed, too loud, too forced. Another rolled his eyes and shook his head, trying to reassert control. They were annoyed now. Annoyance is what happens when intimidation stops working. Keanu lowered his voice again. "You don't owe anyone anything," he said, keeping his eyes on the girl. "If something feels wrong, you're allowed to walk away." She swallowed and nodded. Behind them, one of the men muttered something under his breath and took another step closer. This time Keanu turned fully. Not fast, not slow, just enough. They locked eyes. It lasted only a second, but in that second, something shifted. Keanu didn't stare him down. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't try to look bigger. He looked certain. Certain people are hard to intimidate. The man looked away first. Keanu spoke calmly, voice low but clear enough to be heard. She's not interested. No accusation, no insult, no escalation. Just a statement of fact. The street noise continued around them, but the space between these few people felt isolated now, like a small bubble had formed. The girl held her breath. One of the men scoffed. "We're just talking." Keanu nodded slightly, acknowledging the words without accepting them. "Conversation ends when someone says no," he replied. Simple. Unarguable. For the first time, people nearby began to notice. A woman slowed her pace. A man glanced over his shoulder. The tension was subtle, but it was there. Witnesses changed dynamics. The men felt it. They adjusted their posture, suddenly aware of eyes on them. One forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The girl noticed too. For the first time since she'd spoken up, she wasn't the only one being seen. Keanu didn't press further. He didn't lecture. He didn't threaten. He waited. And waiting is powerful when you're not afraid of the outcome. Why do you think calm confidence makes some people more uncomfortable than anger? Because anger is predictable. Calm control isn't. It forces others to question their power and themselves. The men shifted again. One checked the street behind them, noticing more people slowing down. Another took a half step back without realizing it. Control was slipping. Keanu glanced down at the girl. She was standing straighter now, shoulders less tense. Her hands had loosened their grip on the backpack straps, still cautious, but no longer frozen. "You okay to stay here with me?" he asked quietly. She nodded. That was all he needed. He turned back to the men, expression unchanged. "This is where it ends," he said evenly. Not loud, not aggressive, final. There was a beat of silence, then another. One of the men laughed again, but it sounded hollow now. He gestured dismissively, like he didn't care. A classic move when someone does. "Whatever," he muttered. They began to back away, one by one, slowly, reluctantly, trying to save face. The girl watched, hardly daring to believe it. Keanu didn't move until they were a safe distance away. He didn't follow them with his eyes. He didn't need to. He stayed present, with her. Because authority isn't about dominating others. It's about creating safety where fear used to be. And for the first time that day, the girl felt it. The men didn't leave right away. They drifted back a few steps, pretending they had somewhere else to be, but none of them fully turned away. Their eyes kept coming back to Keanu and the girl, like they were trying to decide whether this situation was really over, or just paused. Underestimation is dangerous. One of them smirked, shaking his head slightly, as if to say this was ridiculous. Another muttered something that made the others chuckle. It was forced laughter, the kind people use when they don't want to admit they've lost control. From their perspective, Keanu was nothing special. No uniform, no badge, no visible authority. Just a quiet man standing in their way. They'd dealt with people like that before, or so they thought. The girl felt the shift immediately. Even though the men had stepped back, her body tensed again. She'd learned the pattern. Retreat didn't always mean safety. Sometimes it meant waiting for the right moment. Keanu noticed her shoulders tighten. He didn't tell her to relax. That never works. Instead, he adjusted his position again just enough to block her view of them. It was subtle, but intentional. If she couldn't see their faces, they had less power over her. One of the men took another step forward, hands raised slightly in mock innocence. "Relax," he said, voice light. "We were just joking." Keanu didn't respond immediately. Silence stretched. People nearby had slowed now. A couple stood pretending to check their phone. A man at the cafe table glanced over his coffee cup and didn't look away this time. Witnesses were forming. The men felt it, that uncomfortable awareness that comes when the crowd starts paying attention. Their casual posture stiffened. The smirks faded. Still, they tried one last tactic. Dismissal. "Man, you don't even know what's going on," one of them said, shaking his head at Keanu. "You're making it weird." That was the moment, because people who say that are used to others backing down. Keanu finally looked directly at him. Not with anger, not with challenge, with clarity. "I know enough," he said simply. The man blinked. That wasn't the response he expected. Keanu didn't explain, he didn't justify himself. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. The girl glanced up at him again. Her eyes were wide but not panicked, curious, like she was seeing something new. An adult who wasn't confused, rushed, or unsure. One of the men scoffed loudly. "Whatever, dude. You think you're some kind of hero?" Keanu didn't answer the question. He didn't need to be a hero. He just needed to stay. The man's voice rose slightly, testing the air. "Simon, guys. Let's go."
This guy's wasting our time.
But no one moved. They were waiting for a signal, and that hesitation said everything. Keanu felt the shift before anyone else did. The balance of the situation had tipped. Not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. The men were no longer deciding what would happen. They were reacting. A woman nearby finally spoke up, her voice uncertain but loud enough to be heard. "Is everything okay here?" The question landed like a weight. The men stiffened. One of them opened his mouth, then closed it again. Another glanced at the people watching, calculating. Keanu nodded calmly. "It is now." That was all. The girl's grip on her backpack loosened further. She took a small step forward, no longer hiding behind him, standing beside him. That choice mattered. The men noticed. Their expressions hardened, then shifted again, this time towards something closer to embarrassment. They hadn't expected an audience. They definitely hadn't expected resistance. And they still had no idea who Keanu was. Why do you think bullies lose power the moment other people start paying attention? Because intimidation thrives in isolation. The second it becomes public, the power dynamic collapses. One of the men muttered a curse under his breath. Another shrugged exaggeratedly, like none of this mattered. "Let's just go," he said again, louder this time, not to Keanu but to his friends. They finally turned away, walking off with forced confidence. Their pace was steady, but their shoulders were tight. They didn't look back, not once. The street slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations resumed. Footsteps picked up. People went back to their lives. But for the girl, everything felt different. She stood there blinking, as if waiting for something else to go wrong. Keanu stayed where he was. He didn't celebrate. He didn't relax too quickly. He knew better. "Are they gone?" she asked quietly. "For now," he said honestly. She nodded, absorbing the words. For the first time since this started, she looked relieved, not completely safe yet, but no longer trapped. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing steadied. She looked up at Keanu again, studying him more closely this time. "Not just as help. As a person, thank you," she said softly. Keanu gave a small nod. "You did the hard part." She frowned slightly, confused. "I just asked for help." He met her eyes. Exactly. And somewhere nearby, a man who had been watching finally whispered to the person next to him, recognition dawning in his voice. "Wait, is that?" Keanu didn't hear it. But the shift had already begun. And the men who thought they could walk away untouched were about to realize something they should have known from the start. They had underestimated the wrong person. The men had barely gone 10 steps when it happened. Not a shout, not a confrontation, just a sentence spoken quietly, almost accidentally. "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" It came from behind them. A man standing near the cafe, phone halfway raised, uncertainty in his voice. He wasn't trying to be loud. He was trying to be sure. But the name carried. One of the 4 men slowed. Another stopped entirely. The third laughed at first, sharp and dismissive. "Yeah, right." But the fourth didn't laugh. He turned around. Keanu was still standing exactly where he had been. Same calm posture, same relaxed shoulders, same quiet attention on the girl beside him. He hadn't followed them. He hadn't watched them leave. He didn't need to. Recognition spreads differently than fear. It doesn't rush, it sinks in. The man's expression changed first. His confidence didn't vanish, it fractured, like glass under pressure. "That's him," he said under his breath. The others turned back now, fully. No pretending anymore. They looked closer. The face, the posture, the unmistakable familiarity they couldn't place at first, because they never expected it here. Not on this street. Not like this. Keanu glanced up, finally aware of the shift behind him. He didn't react. No surprise. No acknowledgement of the name being spoken. Fame wasn't the point. The girl noticed the change immediately. Not in Keanu, in them. Their body language had transformed. The casual arrogance was gone. The smirks had flattened into tight expressions. One of them adjusted his jacket nervously. Another rubbed the back of his neck. They weren't scared. They were embarrassed. Embarrassment is dangerous for people who rely on intimidation. One of them forced a laugh, louder than necessary. Man, people see anyone these days and think they're famous. But his voice didn't convince even himself. A couple nearby were openly staring now. Phones were coming out, not aggressively, but instinctively. The crowd had shifted from passive to aware. The men felt it closing in. Keanu finally turned his attention toward them again. Not because he needed to, because it was over. His voice was the same as before.
Calm, level.
"You should go," he said. Not a threat, not a command, a conclusion. The man who had spoken first swallowed. He glanced at the girl, then back at Keanu. His jaw tightened. Pride wrestled with reality. "Whatever," he muttered. "We were leaving anyway." This time, when they walked away, it was different. Faster, straighter, eyes forward. They didn't try to save face. They didn't joke. They didn't look back. They disappeared into the flow of the street, swallowed by the same crowd that had once protected them. Silence settled briefly. Not awkward. Respectful, Keanu turned back to the girl. The world shrank again to just the two of them. She looked up at him, eyes wide, not starstruck, not excited. Relieved. "They know you?" she said quietly. He nodded once. "Sometimes." She thought about that for a second. Then she asked something unexpected. "Would you have helped me if they didn't?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Yes." No drama. No pause, just truth. Her shoulders relaxed fully for the first time. Around them, the street returned to motion. People moved again, conversations resumed, the moment passing for everyone else. But for her, something fundamental had shifted. Keanu crouched slightly so he was closer to her eye level, not towering, not intimidating. "Is there someone safe I can help you get to?" he asked. She nodded. "My aunt's shop. It's 2 streets away." "Okay," he said, "we'll walk." He didn't take her hand. He didn't rush her. He walked beside her. As they moved, a woman stepped forward briefly, offering a supportive smile. A man nodded at Keanu, recognition clear now, but respectful enough not to intrude. No one asked for photos. No one spoke. They understood this wasn't that kind of moment. The girl glanced up at him again as they walked. "You weren't scared," she said. Keanu shook his head gently. "I was careful." She considered that. "What's the difference?" He smiled, small, thoughtful. "Fear makes you freeze. Care makes you pay attention." They reached the corner. The aunt's shop sign came into view. The girl slowed, then stopped. She turned to face him. "Thank you," she said again. This time her voice was steady. Keanu nodded. "You were brave." She shook her head, almost instinctively. "I didn't feel brave. That's how it usually feels," he replied. She smiled just a little, then ran toward the shop, pushing the door open and disappearing inside. Keanu stayed where he was for a moment, not to watch her. To make sure the street stayed quiet. It did. He straightened, hands in his pockets, blending back into the crowd as easily as he had stepped out of it. No announcement, no applause, just a man continuing his walk. But behind him, the story had already taken shape, not as gossip, not as a headline, as a reminder that real power doesn't announce itself. And sometimes, the most important thing a person can do is notice. The street looked exactly the same. Same traffic, same noise, same people moving in different directions. But for one little girl, everything had changed. Inside the small shop, she stood behind the counter while her aunt spoke to someone quietly. She kept glancing toward the door, not out of fear this time but reassurance, making sure the outside world stayed where it belonged. Safe distance away, Keanu didn't follow her inside. He didn't need to. The moment she crossed that threshold, her posture shifted. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing normalized. The tension that had wrapped itself around her all afternoon finally loosened. That was enough. He stepped back onto the sidewalk and blended into the crowd again, just another person moving forward. No one stopped him. No one called out. No one demanded proof of what had just happened. And that was the point. Moments like this rarely come with witnesses who stay. They don't end with applause or headlines. They end quietly the way they began. But quiet doesn't mean small. A woman who had been watching from across the street turned to her friend and said softly, "I almost didn't stop." Her friend nodded. "Me too." That admission hung in the air longer than any praise could have. Because deep down, everyone there understood something uncomfortable. They had all been close enough to help. They just hadn't. Until one person did. The girl, now safe, would remember this day differently than the others. Not as the day 4 men followed her. Not as the day she was scared on the street. But as the day someone noticed. That memory matters. Because fear teaches kids to stay quiet. Safety teaches them to speak up again. Keanu continued walking, hands in his pockets, face neutral. To him, it wasn't a performance. It wasn't a statement. It was a decision. The decision to stop. The decision to stay. The decision not to look away. Most people imagine courage as something loud, confrontation, shouting, force. But what happened on that street proved something else. Courage can be calm. It can be patient. It can look like standing still when walking away would be easier. The four men were gone now. They would disappear into their own version of the story, likely telling it in a way that preserved their pride. That didn't matter. What mattered was that they didn't win. Not with threats, not with numbers, not with silence. The power shifted the moment attention shifted. And attention is something anyone can give. You don't need strength. You don't need fame. You don't need to know the perfect thing to say. You just need to notice when something feels wrong and be willing to stay long enough for it to change. That's the part people forget. They think helping means fixing everything. Sometimes it just means being there. The street moved on. The moment passed. But the message stayed. Strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about protecting space, especially for those who feel like they don't have any. And silence. Silence is never neutral. It either protects the vulnerable, or it protects the problem. If you believe silence should never protect fear, type respikiti in the comments.